Hi, all participants. We'll be starting shortly. So thank you for your patience. So it will take another 5 minutes for us to start the session. Thank you. Dr. G, we'll be starting the session in the next 2 minutes.
Sounds good.
Welcome to all our participants.
good afternoon to our speaker from Australia. Thank you for joining us on this exclusive masterclass for CBSE school leaders on the topic, do goldfish really have a longer attention span than students of today? My name is Priyanka Vaidyanath, and I work for the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Austrade, in India. I will start with some housekeeping information. Today's session will be for a duration of 1 hour and 30 minutes. This session is also being live streamed on CBSE YouTube channel. So if any of you are facing technical issues, request you to please visit the link shown on the screen. At the end of the session, we'll be taking questions. In order to ask a question, please type your questions in the chat window on the right side of the panel, or use the comment section if you're attending through YouTube channel. Austrade is recording this webinar and will be sharing the recorded version after the session. Please note, the audio quality may fluctuate during the webinar. So in case you have audio related issues, please check your headset and audio settings. And if the issue still persists, please disconnect and connect back again. In case of any network disruptions, please stay online. We will connect back in a few minutes. The Australian government has been taking initiatives to support the sector during this challenging start to 2020. One, we have launched Australia Virtual Masterclass Series, partnering with some of the leading Australian universities to introduce you to Australia's quality education and enable you to smoothly transition to online teaching. The professional development series for school leaders started this week and will continue until the end of June, and all locations are welcome to join. We believe it's a great campaign which can unite the education community during this difficult time. A big thank you to Dr. Biswajit Saha and the Central Board of Secondary Education for extending support to our program. If you would like a deeper experience of Australian education during lockdown, you can discover the wealth of Australian expertise Australia has to offer by searching for the Study Australian Connection on the FutureLearn platform. Austrade will also be launching the 2020 edition of the school's video competition soon. We will keep you posted on the dates and the details of the competition. In this competition, we've had the brightest and the talented students showcase their knowledge across various topics where they create videos and upload the same on YouTube. The winners have traveled to Australia in the past, and this year we'll be back with more excitement. I would now like to introduce our academic, Dr. Gurian Ang. Dr. Gurian Ang, known as Dr. G, is a teaching and engagement-focused academic from the School of Biological Sciences at the University of Queensland, UQ, where he also completed his PhD in 2017. Apart from teaching ecology and zoology at UQ, Dr. G spends his time working with high school biology teachers to renew and refresh their teaching practice through applying modern active learning pedagogy and digital learning. Over to you, Dr. G.
Thank you very much, Priyanka, for that absolutely lovely introduction, and good afternoon, everyone in India. Thank you so very much for having me this afternoon. I know it's a Friday afternoon, the weekend is here, but I can't think of a better way to be celebrating the weekend with a little bit of professional development on a Friday. So just for everyone's knowledge, I am in Brisbane, Australia, which is one of the states of Australia, that is Queensland. And we are 4.5 hours ahead of you. So while it's about 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon there in India, it is 7 p.m. at night here. So I'm very, very happy to be seeing so many of you join us today, and want to extend a really, really warm welcome, not just to those of you on the WebEx platform, but all of you joining on the live stream on YouTube. Welcome and good afternoon. So I just wanted to show you that I am real, and I am the most good-looking academic at the University of Queensland. But very shortly, I am going to turn off my web camera so I don't chew through everyone's bandwidth. Okay, bear with me also, because I'm just about to share my screen with everyone. So once again, thank you everyone for joining in. My name is Gurian, and I'll introduce myself a little shortly, but I want to very firstly welcome everyone to the masterclass. Thank you also to the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Austrade, especially, Priyanka, who is from our Chennai office, who introduced me. But we have a big, big thank you to the education manager, Neha Grover, for organizing so many of these wonderful masterclasses. Now, I understand that we have close to 10,000 people who registered for today's session. I must admit that I've never, ever spoken to, such a mass of people. So this tonight is, I feel incredibly privileged to be reaching so many of you. Today, I'd like us to discuss the modern learner. And really, as education practitioners, we're constantly thinking of really innovative ways to support their learning. I thought we might first do this by defining who the modern learner is. That's a good starting point, but a really nice, intriguing question that will guide us nicely to achieve that is whether or not goldfish really have a longer attention span than our students of today. But we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So as I said, my name is Gurian. My nickname here at UQ is Dr. G. So please feel free to call me Dr. G or simply call me Gurian. In Australia, there isn't much formality, and yeah, so please just call me Gurian. Okay, I'm going to put that away. Excellent, fantastic. So here we go. My journey, I am originally from Singapore. You can see this beautiful scene here. That is one of our fascinating attractions that most people visit Singapore to see. I did a diploma in biotechnology back home. Before, of course, as some of you might know, we have mandatory military service in Singapore. So I did 2 years of that before I then made the decision to leave my home country to pursue my studies in Australia. And I did come here to the University of Queensland to do my Bachelor of Science. By training, I am a zoologist. And I also managed to squeeze in an honors year as part of my degree. That allowed me to do quite a bit of research, and you can see has also taken me to places I never thought I could visit. This image that you see here in the middle with me in what is looking like a relatively dry landscape is the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, another state of Australia. And you can see that I'm waving my arm in front of my face because as a result of the dry, harsh climate, we have lots and lots of flies in New South Wales. I've also got the chance, you can see me squatting down in the field in Samoa, which is a tropical island in the Pacific region. So my research has allowed me to travel, and this is Samoa. It is a beautiful tropical island nation in the Pacific region, and I did a bit of work there. I did my PhD in biological sciences. So by training, I am an entomologist. That means I actually study insects. So I am a zoologist, but I am specifically trained to study insects. I get to do that on an everyday basis and indulge my passion. And as soon as I finished my PhD, I was offered a position to stay with the university and teach. And I am one of very, very few academics that call ourselves teaching-focused academics. So there are about 2,000 academics at the university, and only about 150 of us that call ourselves teaching-focused academics. And very shortly, I'll tell you what that means and why I'm in a nice position to maybe give you a bit more insights into how you might be transforming your learning environment. So typically, I would actually come to India in person to see you all. But unfortunately, due to coronavirus, I don't have that chance this year. This was me. You can see me in the center, always the center of attention, with some of your best and brightest last year. We ran a little competition for your students to solve a global challenge, and we were so excited that so many of the top schools came to join us and had a lot of fun. The Faculty of Science at the University of Queensland is really, really global powerhouse when it comes to research. We are the largest faculty of science in the Southern Hemisphere, and we span across a broad range of disciplines: agriculture and food sciences, biological sciences, where I'm from, chemistry and molecular biosciences, earth and environmental sciences, mathematics and physics, and veterinary science. In terms of the number of students we receive, we have close to 9,000 students that study science at the university, and only about 21% are international. We deliberately keep the international cohort small that choose to come and study science with us, so that when your students come and join us, they know that they're going to actually be interacting a lot with the Australian students. And that's really part of expanding your global perspective when you do leave to study overseas. I have a phenomenal group of students. These are some of my best and brightest students. I taught them in undergraduate, and they work alongside me in many of the different things that we do. So these are my students in the image here. We have about just over 1,000 staff. A good proportion of those are academic staff, but we also have professional staff that support the students. In terms of cultural diversity amongst the academics, we come from all walks of life. So I'm from Singapore, and we have staff that actually come from over 140 different countries, including India as well. So what do I actually do as a teaching-focused academic? Does it mean that I only teach? Does it mean that I don't do research? Well, that's really up to us as teaching-focused academics. And there are many ways in which we can choose to be gainfully employed. I still do a little bit of research on the side with my insects and in agricultural crops. But in the context of teaching and learning, one of the big things a teaching-focused academic does is what we call the scholarship of teaching and learning. And that is really to basically characterize and classify the many ways and initiatives and pedagogy that we use in class, and how we're able to impart that on other teachers, new teachers, or teachers that want a refresher. So I'm actually going to give you some ideas today, which hopefully you can also apply in your classroom. One of the big research themes for me is aligning the high school biology curriculum with undergraduate education. So I am a biologist by training, and I work a lot in the space for biology. And of course, I like to think of myself, including all of the UQ representatives in India, we are positive disruptors, because a lot of our ideas can be immediately translated into viable products and services with a positive impact on our community. So outside of the classroom, I love goldfish. I actually love fish in general. And this is actually an image of me. How long ago was this? This was back in 2016. And here in Queensland, we have a very significant agricultural show that happens once a year. We call this the Ekka. And the Ekka is basically where the country comes into the city. And one of the things you can do in the Ekka is really show off your prized pets and animals. And so for me, I actually breed fish. And I used to breed a lot of goldfish. And I'm very happy to say that in that year that I participated in the Ekka competition, my goldfish actually won first prize, as well as second and third prize in the goldfish category. So that was really good fun. And so we start today's session with that guiding question. We did ask, whether or not goldfish have a longer attention span than our students of today. And this largely came about some time ago because there was this, this somehow in the media, it was being portrayed that the average attention span was down to 12 seconds, okay? So that was in the year 2000. And then when the study was conducted back in 2015, it was found that the average attention span became 8 seconds. And then they pulled another study from a biological scientific journal that showed that the attention span of goldfish could be measured, and that the attention span of goldfish was 9 seconds. So in 2015, there somehow was this article that went viral, Time Magazine, The Telegraph, The Guardian, USA Today, New York Times, The National Post. There was even a Harvard academic that mentioned something to this effect on national radio. So somehow people got the idea and used this rhetoric. And today I'm going to essentially and hopefully quash that myth. So I think as a scientist, I pay very, very close attention to the way in which we say the things that we say. When we make conclusions as a scientist, we're often going to scrutinize the data that actually led you to make that conclusion. And when we actually go back to the study that claimed that the average attention span of people was 8 seconds, we actually find that there are serious errors in the way that study was conducted. One of which was the fact that it was a very, very small pool of people, of only 112 people that were surveyed. And it was a short study conducted by Microsoft Canada, And so the people that were involved in that study was really Canadians. And you can't necessarily generalize one demographic to the rest of the world. So here is your classic example of misinterpretation of the science. But of course, the marketing behind it worked really well because everybody thought that this was a headline that would attract a lot of attention. So of course, the newspapers, the magazines, the online sort of newsletters really ran and went with this rhetoric. Everyone was thinking about it. And if you actually do a little bit of your research today, you will find that the information available, well, it's not very, very forthcoming. Now, if you talk to maybe a clinical psychologist about attention span, they are probably going to tell you that when you use average attention span as a measure, it's pretty meaningless. Because when we are talking about attention span, it's very much task dependent. So, how much attention we apply to a task will vary. And that's because it depends on what the task actually demands. If you talk about fish behavior, to actually ask, a biologist or an animal behaviorist like myself, what is it about fish that we can measure their attention span? Probably they're going to tell you, goldfish have been used as a model system for studying learning and memory for years. So you could argue that goldfish really are, really, really intelligent animals. So this question is bogus altogether. But I think the key is the message behind the question. And that message really being that students of today do seem to be very, very distracted. So we're going to explore exactly why that is very shortly. And so if we have a look at this concept of modern teaching and learning, in the past few years, we've heard a lot of references to this, right? We've heard a lot of information about, what is modern learning? It's a buzzword. Everybody's talking about it. We've heard a lot of references to modern learning, and it's a term that's really quite difficult to pin down because it depends on many, many factors. And it also does include our definition of modern. So you could argue that modern refers to anything that's current. So if that's something you're doing now, is it modern? So there's that element of that, right? That it's because it's occurring in the present or relative to the immediate past. So that's modern. Or is modern relative to the techniques that we're using or the methods that we're using in class? Again, that is perhaps another way we could define what it means to be modern by using the technology. Okay, so I have some ideas around what modern teaching is. And here are some of my thoughts. I believe modern teaching is outside of the classroom. Now, we've just been given a note. There's quite a bit of background noise. Because we have so many people online, it's quite difficult for us to manage all of this at the same time. If you have your microphones turned on, maybe please request that you turn your microphone to the mute mode so that everybody can enjoy the session. Okay, so I'll come back to my slides now and some of my thoughts on modern teaching. I do feel that modern teaching needs to be out of the classroom. But I do mean this in a traditional sense. And what I do mean is that we have to revolutionize the way in which we teach to apply stuff that is out of the classroom, but in some cases still physically in the classroom. Okay, and I'll show you how we've done some of that at the university. Assessment needs to be authentic, which is also why it's very, very common for a lot of the international curricula that get revised, every 3 to 4 years. I'm sure this is also done in the CBSE curricula to ensure that the assessment forms are becoming more and more authentic. What I mean by authentic is assessment being rewritten and task sheets being given out that give students a realistic amount of time and deliver in a realistic way that might simulate what they might be facing later on in life as working professionals. Shortly, I'm going to give you some examples of how to craft questions that elicit authentic experience. Modern teaching must be evidence-based. What I mean by that is that you need to be able to measure the outcome of your teaching. Modern teaching cannot be, I thought of an idea, let's just try it in class. It cannot be that way. Modern teaching needs to be evidence-based. And so what's really, really important, and I do hope that there are communities in India set up to do this, and that is, again, the scholarship of teaching and learning, where we're helping others in our community, our colleagues, get better at what they do. Finally, modern teaching is continuous, it is content-rich, it is immediate. And that's because modern learners want content that is rich, continuous, and immediate. I think you'll all agree with me when I say that the current structure of most universities and in fact most high school syllabuses is such that there is really no continuity for a student once they graduate from grade to grade. I do something in grade 9, I don't see it again in grade 10. Or even our senior years that are about to graduate, they do something in year 11, but then they forget because of the holidays, right? And then in year 12, you find a lot of time is spent just bringing that back up to speed. This is an area I think we need so much improvement in. And so let's start to think about innovative ways in which we might be, I guess, adapting to the new learning needs of our students. The modern learner is best described in 3 ways. Now, there are many, many ways we can describe the modern learner, but I'm just going to pull 3 things that I feel are particularly relevant to the generation before us in the classroom. And of course, like any scientist, I make these conclusions relative to good, high-quality research papers. The modern learner is overwhelmed and distracted. Now, Bersin in 2018 wrote a really, really good report. Now, we will make these slides hopefully available to you so you can yourself go through these references and learn a little bit more. And so what we know from this reference is that people in this day and age, whether we're talking about students or teachers or working professionals, you are actually spending a good amount of your time with technology. 25% of your time is spent on emails. You're checking your phones at least 150 times a day. I know it sounds like it's something extreme, but it's absolutely true. Okay, so we are dealing with students that are overwhelmed with information, but then also being distracted by it. This could explain why, in terms of their ability to focus and concentrate, there is a reflection on the length of their attention span, because they live in an age and a digital era where the stimulation is just so overwhelming. And so visually and what happens as a result of that is the brain training itself to become, operating in hyperdrive. And we can look at brain chemistry, but we don't have time to do that today. And I know not all of you are scientists, but people that have studied brain chemistry in the younger generation will tell you that the brain chemistry is very, very different to people who are maybe in the 40 to 60-year-old age bracket. Okay, and by that, we can actually measure some of the biochemical compounds in their brains, and they tell us that students basically have these biological mechanisms that really stimulate them to look for the next best, most attractive form of stimulus. Okay, and that's why they're getting easily distracted, not just in class, but also beyond. Now, the modern learner wants this, right? So this is Google Analytics. Google Analytics has showed us, based on the length of time they spend on their devices, that we can actually see some trends in what a student actually searches for. And so most, people actually search for, if they're looking for maybe an answer to a report that they need to write. So I'm relatively familiar with, say, the International Baccalaureate syllabus. So one of the things that IB students do is the extended essay. And so one of the questions that they need to address has to be derived from a research claim. So say, for example, if they're going to investigate, whether or not genetic technology offers solutions for disease, then what a student is going to do is go onto the web and look for keywords like best genetic therapy, best genetic technology. So, what this actually suggests and what Google Analytics is telling us is that the students can associate the quality of the work that they do with the quality of resources they can find. So oftentimes they're looking for best this or best that. We also know that when they scroll through the pages of whether it's social media, whether, Facebook or Instagram, or even if it's an article that you've given them to look at, 7 seconds and that's it. Okay, and I agree with, I just saw a comment there, the aesthetic value is so incredibly important. That plays a part in that short amount of time when people decide whether it's for them or not. 7 seconds. Of course, marketing professionals use this to their advantage. Maybe we as educators need to start thinking like marketers too, okay? Now, finally, I like to think of the modern learner as a needs-based learner. Okay, it's that we are needs-based learners ourselves, right? I guess as teachers, most of the time we're very time poor. We've got so many classes to teach and we've got so many lesson plans to write. If you ask me as a teacher to do more learning, well, I want to learn only if I absolutely need it for my practice. I don't know if you agree with me, but that certainly is the case for those of us here in Australia. We've got just no time. We're inundated with so much stuff to do for our students, marking and assessment and lesson planning, that if you want me to learn something new, then give me content I need, okay? So a full reference list and a comprehensive overview of the modern learner is provided by Elucidat. Now, if you don't remember this reference, just maybe write down Elucidat because it's a really, really useful online resource that you might find useful yourself. So I have 2 ideas for you that I want to show you what I've done in the classroom. I'm not one of those academics that will just blather on and on about. I like showing people things. I like showing my students things. So in the same way that I want to show you what I've done. Now, I am a biologist and I teach biology. So for those of you that are not scientists, I do apologize. But hopefully some of the ideas and the pedagogy that I share with you, you might apply in your practice regardless of whatever subject matter that you teach. I do believe that as modern teachers, we need to start thinking about repackaging our subject matter. Now, one thing that I've developed for the year 12 biology students here in Queensland, we, because of, I guess, fortunately, because of coronavirus, I was able to find a bit of time to support our students here in Queensland. We have about, of course, this pales in comparison to the population of India, but we have about 17,000 students that do biology at the senior level. And one of the things that they learned about in biology, a concept we call selection patterns. So how many different organisms that we share our world with evolve over time to evolve very, very particular traits that make them better at what they do in the environment. Now, this is not a biology class, but I wanted to show you a resource that was made available to our students over here. So our students can log on to the website that I've created for them. And what you will do is actually go through a series of informative videos that the student actually walks through. Now, I've no time to play these videos for you, but you are most welcome to view them in your own time, and maybe some of you might also find it useful. And then you will notice that as a student progresses from one video to the other, they actually have to do a worksheet. So I want to share with you some ideas of how we're able to keep them engaged, given that just prior to this, we mentioned those attention spans shortening, or in my opinion, those attention spans evolving. So we actually have, say, a worksheet here for the students to complete. And what's paramount is that they complement those videos that they watch with the worksheet. Now, there's one thing that I highly recommend that you do, especially at the senior level. Assessment in any shape and form must be accompanied with score allocation. I guess for a lot of students in India, this is appealing because as soon as they see a score, they will see training for their exams, okay? And certainly at university, we always include a mark allocation for any question we ask, not necessarily because we're assessing our students, but it's even just to give them some idea as to how much should be included in their response. So the number of marks you award your students gives them a good idea of how much is expected from them. Okay, so they watch a video, answer some questions, and the second video that they watch, the first part of that video actually gives them the answers to those questions. So they actually check their own answers, proceed with the content, questions, come back to the next video, check their answers, questions, come back to the next video. Now, this particular activity also includes a game. We also do play-based learning in this particular activity. Now, you will also notice that one of the sections, I've actually integrated it out of context. So they were learning actually for that particular activity, they were learning about patterns associated with the evolution of mice, whether relative to the mice being hunted by foxes and the mice being hunted by cats. Now, we give them something completely out of context, but based on the information that they've just learned about. This is information about how patients change over time relative to diabetes that the biology students can relate to, okay? So a student basically goes through this. There's a bit of play-based learning, so on and so forth. And so I take you back now to the slides, and I'll tell you exactly, we'll try and make these videos available to you as well, so you can consult them and use them. So I want to, I guess, give you some idea as to some of the pedagogy behind them, and hopefully you'll find it useful in some shape and form. This is the particular game that they play, so the students need to actually download the app on their smartphones, and then they actually play, and they're tiny little mice that runs across the screen, and they are the predator hunting the mice. And then over time, you will see that the patterns of these agility traits in mice change with preceding generations, okay? So now I will tell you some of the ins and outs of such a resource. First, if you do package subject matter, you must package them modular. You must repackage subject matter in a modular way. Obviously, there needs to be some logic as you progress from module to module, but what you must do is package them in a way where students can compartmentalize concepts one after the other in a sequential way. I understand that that's not always a possibility, but try and innovate in this way and package in a modular way. If you are thinking of video tutorials for your students, my recommendation, certainly with what we have found in our students, is that when you do package them as modules, students would benefit most and the learning is most effective within the 5 to 10 minute duration for each module. So an activity like this one here would take a student approximately 1 hour to complete. The other beauty of repackaging subject matter in this way is that a lot of it is self-directed learning. That's something that really, really intrigues me. I am absolutely an practitioner and encourager of self-directed learning. In other words, learning that takes place outside of the classroom in their own time, in their own comfort, because the classroom is meant for consolidating that learning. So go and learn outside, and then let's bring it back and really apply ourselves in the classroom. I do a lot of this with my students, but of course at university, we can afford to do that because there's less contact time with our students. So they do a lot of stuff outside, we bring it back, and then we reconsolidate their learning. I guess for me, what excites me most about self-directed learning is the amount of empowerment that a student receives, because now they are taking things into their own hands. They're getting more ownership of their learning. They feel like they own their learning, and if they successfully get from module to module, they verify their answers and they got them right, they get constantly, I guess, motivated to keep going with it. And so we do a lot of self-directed learning. I'm not sure if you're, I guess, aware of, outside of school, if we actually look at the workplace and how professionals are trying to upskill themselves, maybe you've heard of this buzzword, micro-credentials, micro-masters, shorter form credentials. Even professionals now are looking for modular ways that they can self-learn. Let's start with our students as well. Now, when we do things in a modular format, we also give our students an opportunity for what we call reflective learning. And that is, you watch something, you answer some questions, and immediately after that, you watch the next video, which actually gives them the answers to the questions they've just addressed. Being able to revise immediately is the best way in which we can give them an opportunity for deep reflective learning. The coronavirus has actually given us the opportunity at university to do a lot of this. And one of the feedback from our students, although they don't get to see us and they miss us for that, face-to-face contact, what they actually get an appreciation of, which they typically wouldn't do in a normal semester, is that opportunity for that really deep reflective learning. And then, of course, I did mention the importance of making it relevant to the student. I guess for a high school student gearing up for final exams, relevance to them is in the shape and form of mark allocation and exam style questions. So that's one idea I have for you. Now I have a second idea for you. We need to also think about authentic assessment. We need to think about authentic assessment. And one way in which we can do that in a high school setting is with the very, very thoughtful use of what we call cognitive verbs. Obviously, at the high school level, we cannot expect to give our students work integrated learning. Not all of them, or not all schools can do internships or placements, and a lot of people that I guess are undertaking the CBSE curriculum or the IB curriculum in India, you're gearing up for final exams. So for a lot of high school, authentic assessment largely still revolves around examination, but can we be more thoughtful in the way we ask questions that creates, or I guess the best word to put this is sort of modernize their learning, okay? So I want to introduce you to the concept of cognitive verbs. Now here in Australia, in the teaching and learning world, we refer to cognitive verbs typically as the action word in the question that actually elicits specific responses in the students. Now, here in Queensland, all of our well, not just high school. In fact, all of the mandatory education, right from kindergarten all the way up to high school, is managed and moderated by the Queensland Curriculum and Assessment Authority, the QCAA. So I'm going to share with you, I guess, a resource that particularly for the high school teachers might be useful to you. We here in Australia, I guess, have very, very thoughtful ways of categorizing what we expect of our students. And these are the three broad categories that we expect students to be able to do. Of course, one of the key things that anybody needs to be able to do is have some capacity for memory, because it reflects, I guess, your ability to recall information when it is needed. Retrieval and comprehension is one of these categories. We, of course, then need to be able to assess analytical skills in our students, and that might, of course, in the mathematical sense, include how we solve problems. Then we need to give them an opportunity to apply their knowledge. So these are oftentimes referred to as the higher order thinking type skills. And I guess the usefulness of this particular document, and I'll show you that now, it's a PDF, is when we go down these three main schools of thoughts, or these three main, suites of skills we expect in our students, then we have a long, long list of cognitive verbs that we can use for them to, we ask questions using these cognitive verbs, and then they elicit specific, I guess the word is responses in our students. So this is a resource that we might be able to make available to you, but it is publicly available through our Queensland Curriculum and Assessment Authority. Okay, so I'll give you an example of a very thoughtful way in which we can modernize the way we ask questions to show authentic assessment. And I hope you don't mind me taking you into one of my first year classes and teaching you a little bit about insects. So it's a short story, and we have in many parts of the world an invasive species called the red imported fire ant, for short RIFA. The scientific name for red imported fire ant is Solenopsis invicta. This is an ant with quite a cosmopolitan distribution, and it's invaded many, many different countries outside of its natural range. This is an insect, and like all insects, you can see that they undergo some level of metamorphic change from the egg stage all the way to the adult form. And like all ants, you will know that they have a colony system dominated by a queen that produces all of the offspring and lots of workers that support the queen in this endeavor. RIFA is a huge problem in many, many parts of the world, because when we do get infestations, they're really hard to control. And you can see here that one reason why it's really hard to control is that people can't really identify them in the first place. There is huge amount of variation in the body size of the ant. So you really can't go out and say, look for ants that are 2 millimeters in length and red in color, because this particular species can be anywhere from this small, tiny body size all the way to the large one, and they're all the same species. So control through identification is difficult. Now, RIFA have a really, really fascinating colony feeding system. And that is that unlike a lot of other ants, the workers actually regurgitate the food for their queen. So in most ant colonies, the workers feed their queens the food. But in the case of this species, the workers actually eat the food themselves and then expel the digested material and feed that to the queen. Okay, so I've given you a short lesson on insects, and I hope you didn't get grossed out, particularly those of you that maybe don't like insects very much. Now, in a very traditional assessment style, what can I do? In a very traditional assessment style, I could ask my student to simply describe the colony feeding system. So the cognitive verb used here, which is describe, okay, is a very, very simple recall question. Let's consider a way in which we can modernize the way we ask by simply changing the cognitive verb. So perhaps a more authentic style is this, okay? I'm giving them a scenario. We've got an outbreak of this species in the Northern Territory, Australia. The council is proposing the use of ant bait to control the infestation. Appraise the effectiveness of this strategy. In here, I've used a completely different cognitive verb that elicits a completely different understanding and application of knowledge. Appraise requires a student to be able to weigh the strengths and weaknesses of what's being proposed. But it's essentially the same knowledge that is drawn from the first style of question. Because in the first style of question, a student still needs to be able to present their knowledge of the colony feeding system. And that is that the workers eat the food, regurgitate the digested material for the queen. Here, the student needs to use that knowledge and then apply it in a sense that if you're using ant baits, in other words, you're trying to poison these ants, it will not work for this species because when the workers eat the food first, they're going to die from the poisoning first before they even get a chance to feed it to the queen and kill her. And so this is a way in which the student is actually utilizing that knowledge and applying it into what would typically be quite an authentic scenario in the workplace. So of course, at the university level, we're able to do this in a bit more of an effective way. And when we think about maybe primary school and high school, and I understand that many of you joining us today are from primary school, you know, this might be a little bit more challenging, but I'm hopefully, I guess, giving you some ideas in which you can be a little bit more innovative and creative in your practice. Okay, so thank you so much for that. Let's have a summary of this masterclass. We began the masterclass with, I guess, a quick definition of modern teaching and learning. We know that this is very, very dynamic, but more importantly, modern teaching and learning needs to be evidence-based. So go and look up, you know, resources that have been tried and tested and definitely work in integration with your colleagues in your communities. We describe the modern learner as someone that is a needs-based learner, someone that responds to multiple sources of information in a content-rich world. And we as educators are here to sort out the fact from the fiction. You know, we do live in an era of fake news, but yet also delivering just what our students need because they are learning needs-based. Try and repackage your teaching into modular format. That's one idea I gave you. And be mindful of some of the ways in which you get your students to go through the subject matter. Try and find innovative solutions that promote pedagogies like self-directed learning and reflective learning, because oftentimes that level of learning is far more effective. And use your classroom as the environment to reconsolidate that form of learning. Where possible, think about more creative ways to make assessments more authentic. And we can do that, like we mentioned, with just being very thoughtful with the cognitive verbs that we use so that they elicit the appropriate responses we'd like to see as skills in our students. Finally, my top tip to you, make sure you evaluate your practice consistently and use a reliable framework to do that. So here at the university, we say we go through oftentimes the scholarship of teaching and learning. And that's because all of us as academics here at the University of Queensland constantly reevaluate our practice. We do that with our peers. We do have our own internal framework that we address different criteria to which we get, I guess, appraised upon. And which is also no wonder that, you know, at UQ, we are Australia's most awarded university for National Teaching Awards. In fact, we've won the greatest number of National Teaching Awards than any other Australian university. I know that there are lots and lots of questions, and I'll do my best to share even more ideas outside of what we've done in our short masterclass today. I do, however, have a short plug for another of our events that you might be interested in attending, looking at careers of the future, where some of our experts talk about the emerging career fields. So certainly do look up our Future Students website to find out more. With that, thank you so very, very much for your time. Let's come and take some questions from you now.
Thank you, Dr. G, for such a fantastic masterclass. The topic is undoubtedly interesting. We'll now welcome questions from the audience. And in order to ask a question, you simply type your question in the chat window on the right side of the panel, or put a comment under the YouTube live video. In fact, I've received a lot of questions, more than 30, 40. So let me try and run through as many as possible in the interest of time. So here's the first one. After COVID, when schools reopened, due to the habit of learning from digital platform, what are the ways to engage the students again into the old form of learning?
So I don't think the classroom has a place for the old form of learning. I would hope that we as educators have taken a lot of lessons from COVID-19. Many of you have been forced outside of your comfort zones. You've been forced to learn about new technology. You've become more thoughtful in the way you might be presenting your subject matter to your students. I would hope that you don't go back to the old form. I would hope that you take advantage of the technology that you've learned in order to modify and revolutionize the way that you teach. Certainly for me and my own practice, I am intending to do a lot of that self-directed form of learning. I know some people might think it's a lazy way of doing things, but there's in fact a lot more work that goes into that, because you need to be very, very thoughtful with what you give your students before, during, and after the class. And so for me, I'd like to see a day and age where the student takes more ownership of their learning through some of the self-directed learning resources you might give them. They do that in their own time. Don't give them something that will take too long, something that maybe takes 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Then come to class and let's work actively on that. Let them take ownership of that learning and then do the reconsolidation in class. So I would hope that for all of us, we would do a little bit of that. And still, I know that maybe we go back to where there's no more need for online sort of interaction with our students because we're seeing them face to face, but maybe keep up with that, give them opportunities for enrichment courses through the holidays, perhaps. Just some ideas. Thanks for that question.
So there's another one related to COVID. So what will be our strategy to train our students and teachers post-COVID situation? Which teaching pedagogy should we use post-COVID?
Oh, Priyanka, sorry, you're on mute. I didn't get the last part of the question.
Okay, so what will be our strategy to train our students and teachers post-COVID situation? Which teaching pedagogy should we use post-COVID? And what are the positive and negative impacts of COVID on the attention and the students?
Yeah, great. So that's a great question. I actually am a huge practitioner of active learning, as are a lot of academics in Australia. Active learning is, of course, anything that is innovative in a sense that whether it's hands-on learning, whether it's play-based learning. So any pedagogy that falls under the active learning banner, I think, is important. And I don't think that there are strategies or pedagogies that we need to focus on or do more of post-COVID. There really isn't a need to modify pedagogies dramatically, because we should always be doing active learning anyway with our students. I guess what we do need to do, though, is be mindful of the technology available to us, because we will find that in many ways, the technology is actually going to improve the learning experience. I don't mean that teachers need to, use the technology, but try and be creative. If a student is looking for information outside of a textbook, where are they going to look? They're going to look at Google, online search engines. Also, yeah, thanks for that. May we please request that all attendees set their microphones to the mute? You might not realize that we can hear everything that's going on in your background. It's a little bit disruptive, so please set your microphones to mute. And I'll just quickly come back to my response to the question. And I think the best way to put it is, let's not change our pedagogy. We should be all practitioners of active learning anyway. But let's try and take advantage of the technology. We don't necessarily need to use the technology if we're not comfortable with it. But let's try and use the technology that we know our students are using a lot of. You know, can your student learn from a YouTube video? Can a student learn something from a short TikTok video? You know, so on and so forth. I think we can start getting quite creative.
Thank you. So in fact, I had this question too. Why has goldfish specifically been chosen to compare on behalf of attention, as fish is from a different class or group?
Yeah, that's great. So specifically the first part of the question about why goldfish was selected, I mean, largely because a lot of the work, a lot of the research done in that space use goldfish as a model organism. In fact, the very first study on fish memory was using goldfish as a model, and that was as early as 1908, I believe. So when I did when I sort of explored the answer to that question, you know, I found a paper all the way to 1908. Goodness. So goldfish have been used in scientific research for a really, really long time. So that answers the first part of the question. I guess the second part of the question is why we choose it. Like I said, that particular question is more of, I guess, a marketing rhetoric. Don't forget that a lot of the articles that were written that went viral back in 2015 were largely people trying to get readers to read their whether it's an online newspaper or a magazine, and so it was largely just the clever use of rhetoric.
Thank you so much. In fact, when you were talking about pedagogy, we got a question saying, would you recommend pedagogy to be intuitive in nature? Why or why not?
Yeah, so I guess by that question, intuitive meaning, I guess so I've never heard of I guess intuitive pedagogical strategies. I'm assuming that what you mean is that it's intuitive in a sense where what we apply in class, we get the student to I guess apply themselves in a very logical way. So I'm assuming that that's what you mean by intuitive pedagogy, where the student themselves are maybe given a task where they are expected to be able to deal with the syllabus without having you taught them the stuff in the first place. So I assume that that's what is meant by intuitive. Yes, I think there's a place for that. We do have to be careful though, because what we don't want to get our students to do is apply themselves in a haphazard manner. What we want to do is get our students to apply themselves in a logical manner. So some amount of groundwork needs to happen first. Some amount of learning needs to happen first. And that might take a variety of pedagogical strategies. And then you can maybe apply the intuitive stuff through assessment or scenario-based activities in class.
Great, thank you so much. Before I ask the next question, I please request all of you to mute your audio, please. It's just that we just want an uninterrupted session today. Thank you so much. So the next question is, as self-directed learning will not benefit every student, what can be the alternative?
Yeah, great. That's a great question, right? So typically self-directed learning, yeah, I completely agree with you. Everybody's got a different demographic of student. If you're lucky, you have a very engaged class, but not everyone is in that position. So I guess self-directed learning, I don't know if I necessarily have the answer to that question. Here at university, of course, it's not much of a problem. And for us as academics, you know, if you don't do the work, I'm sorry, like I'm not here to hold your hand, right? But at school, you as high school teachers, primary school teachers have more of a responsibility taking your students through. Now, I know this might be a radical idea, but why not have assessment revolved around self-directed learning that might encourage them to get it done. You know, one thing that we do here at university that is similar to that is we have what we call hurdle assessments. So it's not necessarily you don't necessarily get a score out of it, but if you don't do it, you don't pass the course. So I guess what I'm saying is we could be encouraging them to do the self-directed learning component if you do put some sort of achievement or reward behind it.
Great. So the next question would be, what causes lack of concentration in a child? Does age affect attention span?
Yeah, good question. Yes, right. So if you do go through a lot of the clinical psychology type work, or if you are familiar with that kind of the literature and how to navigate through the literature, you will know that a way in which we can measure accurately and reliably, I guess, attention span, which largely has also led to the ability of child psychologists to diagnose different learning abilities like ADHD and whatnot, is a lot of work using brain chemistry. So a lot of the biochemical molecules that the brain naturally produces are associated with very, very specific regions of the brain, but also very, very specific moods. So mood learning is yet another whole lecture altogether in itself, and how we can actually, you know, take advantage of the mood that we create in our students to maximize learning. So what, I guess, to answer the question about a way in which, like, why, how is that explained? That is explained largely through brain chemistry, and obviously many things affect brain chemistry, everything from gender to age to diet to experience, and by experience it could be the home experience, the home environment, or even the school experience and the social interactions. So many factors do affect that. I don't like to see attention spans as shrinking. I don't like to see them as decreasing, although numerically, quantitatively, yes. But I'd like to see them as evolving. They're evolving because of the evolution of human lifestyle. You know, back when most of us were students ourselves, we're not bombarded with this level of stimulus, both technologically, you know, through the media, you know, even you see the way in which the textbooks today are written and the kind of infographics that they use, you know, the kind of diagrams that you see in stimulus and child storybooks compared to back when we were children ourselves and when we went through schools ourselves. Like, you would see that it is so stimulating, like visually, aesthetically, it's so very different. So I'd like to think of, you know, attention as something that's evolving and not necessarily diminishing. In terms of how age influences attention span, yes, it does. Because what we realize is, of course, at school, they're doing anything and everything. And most of the time, they're doing things that are really abstract. You know, many people would argue that the stuff that you're learning in school today, you don't necessarily apply in the workplace down the track. And oftentimes in school, we as teachers, because we are teaching the material, get quite divorced from what goes out there in industry and the professional setting. So of course, age affects this, because as you work, as you grow up, as you do more things that you enjoy, as you prioritize your lifestyles, attention spans then start to increase, because the more engaged you are and the more interested you are in the stuff that you do, then the more energy you invest in attending to it.
Great. In fact, as we speak, we're just receiving questions on and on. I'll try to cover as many as possible. Apologies.
We'll do our best.
Yes, we'll do our best. So how do you motivate kinesthetic learners in the present scenario?
I guess I am very fortunate that I teach ecology and zoology, which in nature is very kinesthetic. Yes, it's very visual as well, but it's very kinesthetic because ecologists, we do a lot of field work. And zoologists, we do a lot of interaction with specimens. So I guess I'm lucky in that the disciplines that I teach are naturally very, very kinesthetic. And for those that are unfamiliar with kinesthetic learners, these are learners that really need to be active and do stuff. They're not those that can just sit and absorb information. They learn best when they're actively engaged in it. And so I guess I do recommend that, if you do have a kinesthetic learner in class, then obviously you do need to think of more creative ways to get them involved, which is why I re-emphasize that modern teaching is out of the classroom. But of course, you can be creative and you can go out of the classroom while still in the classroom. So I guess I'm probably not the best person to give you specific ideas that might be useful for your practice, but I definitely encourage kinesthetic learning.
Great. So the next one is children who have ADHD often jump from task to task without finishing any of them. Why do they do this?
That is actually a, I guess, I don't like the word side effect of ADHD because it's simply a diagnosis and it's outside of the student's control because we're dealing with biochemical processes in the brain that are largely, that could be genetic in nature. So I guess what we're able to do for most of us is when we are provided with a list of things to do, what most people can do is prioritize that, right? Most of us can do that. Maybe not all of us do that well, but we're able to do prioritization. So the key word in the scientific literature is in behavior, both human and animal, is prioritization. So if we're given a list of tasks to do, I mean, the same way, right? If those of you that you're going to the supermarket and doing some shopping, if you've got a list of things that you need to buy, what you will be able to do is prioritize the order in which you're going to get them. And that's because of your experience going from aisle to aisle, you know how the supermarket is organized. A child with ADHD does not have the capacity to do that in that, firstly, they're not necessarily able to very, very quickly recall that former knowledge of how they've organized knowledge. Okay, that's one. The second is because for them, prioritization is limiting. So they're not necessarily going to be able to go, I need to do step 1, followed by step 2, followed by step 3, because to them, I'm going to get the most reward if I do everything. So all they're interested in is getting things done, but not necessarily with the outcome in mind. So oftentimes with those students, that's what you find. So one of the things that we do at the university when I guess, which is very different from a high school, is we actually have tutors, which are oftentimes our PhD candidates or our very high achieving undergraduate students. We have some of those who are very, very specifically trained to deal with special needs in learning. And so what we are able to do is if we have a large class of 200 individuals, we will then have a subset of those students that work with specially trained tutors. Now, I know that's not always possible, but I do hope as time progresses that in India, we're going to have more and more child psychologists enter the teaching workforce so that you can have educators that are very, very focused on dealing with the needs of students with those special needs, including ADHD. And you're absolutely right. I am not a psychologist. I'm not a special needs educator. That is my understanding of students with ADHD. And hopefully your school would have resources with specialist educators to deal with that group.
Great. So the next couple of questions, I'll focus on the attention span. Those are the questions we received at the beginning of the session. So what's the average attention span of human in seconds?
So that is not a question that can be answered, and science hasn't answered that at all, because every time a paper comes out and it suggests that the attention span is X seconds, when you start to scrutinize the way in which those questions are actually asked and the methodology behind those experiments, they oftentimes are very, very flawed. So I can't remember the academic that does this. There is one academic from the United States that her research is entirely focused on scrutinizing these sorts of studies, right? So I guess, again, the important takeaway when we talk about attention span is that attention span, when we say average attention span, it's really a meaningless quantity. It's really meaningless because attention span varies, because attention span is task dependent. Attention span is task dependent, right? So I guess to answer that question, the easiest way to put it is not necessarily to give you a quantity, but rather to give you a trend. And that trend is the more interested you are in your task, the greater your attention span is going to be. I think that's the easiest way to put it.
Great. So I got a couple of questions around meditation. So in India, we believe that meditation is good to increase attention span of students. So do you agree?
I think so. Meditation has, and some of our academics do that themselves. Meditation, I guess, is awesome in that it gives the body. So this is a physiological reset. That's what meditation does, right? Because you are seated in a very particular way, and you are training your mind to focus and put everything else aside. So as you meditate, and the longer you meditate, then the greater the probability of your biochemistry and your physiological systems getting reset. And then as soon as it's reset, then what it does mean is that as soon as you receive a stimulus, because meditation is really being focused on a particular thing and trying to put aside everything else, all the noise goes, and you just focus on one thing. That's meditation, right? So such that when you get out of that, as soon as you get the stimulus, your body is ready to respond to it. And in doing that, what you find is that, I guess, you reset for the learning to occur effectively.
Great. Moving on to the next one. What efforts can we do to improve the attention of students of today in this modern era of mobile or say digital technology, especially during online classes and teaching many students at the same time?
Yeah, great. That's a brilliant question. So that's true, right? Because those of you that have done it live with your students in the same way that we're doing this live, I can't see you. I can't see any of you, right? So I don't even know if whether you're, doing something completely different, whether you're paying attention or you're just, not bothered. So I don't know that, right? I can't see them. So, which is why I think I bring us back to that importance of repackaging what we teach. There is absolutely no way. Duration is so important. Duration is important in that the students of today will not sit through an entire lecture. They absolutely will not do that. So I have two ideas for you. The first I already went through, which was repackaging everything such that you are delivering material in a modular format. And in terms of time frame, 5 to 10 minutes per module is sufficient, but it must be interspersed with activity outside of those videos. Okay, so I gave you one example, but I'll give you a second thing that I do in my class. So of course, at university level, we're expected to give lectures. For those of you with the same situation where the subject matter you teach, mathematics being a good one, the subject matter you teach cannot be modular, right? When you teach a concept, you oftentimes need longer than 10 minutes per concept. So one thing that I do in my lectures is that when the student receives the lecture notes, you will find blanks in them. Those blanks correspond to keywords. And so as this lecture is being given, the student must write and fill in the blanks. They're finding the answers to the blanks in what I deliver. There is a lot of evidence that writing enhances what we call metacognition. So just by writing, even if you're writing subconsciously, other parts of your brain are actually at work, although you consciously don't realize that. So that's another idea I can give you if you can't see the student on the other side, because we have the same problem here at university. All of our lectures are recorded, so the kids don't show up. They want to watch it. And remember, needs-based learner, what do? They're going to watch it 2 hours before the exam. Okay, so I guess my suggestion for those of you that can't package your material in modular format, consider ways in which metacognition is increased, and writing is a good one. So get them to write, get them to find the clues to the blanks as you are delivering the subject matter.
Thank you so much. So the next one is, can attention span of students be increased by giving them tasks of their choice?
Yes, I am such a huge advocate of multiple assessment forms that get the student to choose what they want to do. Now, I know that's not always possible, so I'll give you some ideas. You can also craft assessment that is the same, okay? So you still tick off all of the skills, but they need to provide a response to different target audiences. So for example, I teach a science communication course that the assessment is getting them to put together an active learning activity. Now, there are very strict matrices that I assess my students on, but they choose the target audience they want. So it gives them a bit of flexibility and creativity based on their own aptitude, because some of them, so largely I give that course to teachers, right? So most teachers obviously would want to pitch their assessment to students, but there are other people that take this course that are not necessarily teachers and want to pitch their audience as the general public, or scientists that want to pitch the same assessment to other scientists. So one idea is, if you have rigor around the assessment that you craft, consider the kids doing different target audiences. Now, I am a huge advocate of different assessment modes, simply because we cannot pigeonhole future careers. We absolutely cannot do that. Many of you might have heard the rhetoric of the future of the job world. 2/3 of the job that currently exists today will become obsolete in the future. So 2/3 of tomorrow's jobs don't currently exist. And you might also have heard of the rhetoric of, in the average person's lifetime, they will do something of the tune of undertake 17 jobs across 5 different industries. So why not give people an opportunity to choose their own adventure, because we absolutely cannot pigeonhole future careers. So how, right? So a good question is how. You obviously don't always have that flexibility, but if you did, consider multiple types of assessment, consider opinion pieces, consider expositions, consider action learning projects, consider classroom presentations, consider infographics. These are quite an assortment of different, I guess, the final assessment is it takes different shape and form, but yet you could still assess the same thing. So if, let's say, you want them to do a project, let them decide the best way to communicate that project, whether it's in an oral presentation, whether it's in a poster, whether it's in an infographic, whether it's in an activity. So here are some suggestions, I guess.
Thank you. So tapping on your expertise, can you please suggest some in-class activities that might be helpful to attract the students' attention?
Yes, anything game-based the students love. So I understand that many of you are from a primary school. I'll give you something I read, because I don't work with primary school teachers, but I will tell you something I read quite recently that I thought was, oh my God, for a primary school, quite brilliant. So many of you know Minecraft, right? Many of you know Minecraft. And Minecraft is, for those of you that don't know, is basically a digital world where the bandwidth, doesn't chew through a lot of bandwidth, because the programming behind it is not very complicated. But the appeal of Minecraft is such that a student enters this, enters this digital world, and they can use these building blocks, kind of like Lego, to create their own cities. And so the teacher is a primary school teacher, and she actually tasked their students with creating a city. And all she needed was, she had this overarching question. She said, all of you are going to be entering this world. It's a blank slate, and you need to create a city of tomorrow. And that's it. That's it. Talk about intuitive learning. That's it. The students themselves then went on to start building because they love it, right? They're actually just playing. But then they started to think more informatively about, okay, if I'm going to build this city, what do I need in this city? So they themselves started to do their own research, okay? And then, oh, they need energy. They need education. They need, this and that. Then some of them thought about sustainability. So independently of the teacher, they came to the conclusion that they needed some form of governance. Governance is not the same as government, okay? Governance is basically, how do we regulate all of these key processes? They started building things. They started drawing from information that they independently sourced information about. So that's an example from, I guess, a primary school setting where game-based learning is the best. Like, honestly, game-based learning is great. I know it's not always easy to find, but there are a wealth of apps out there. Go and try them yourselves, looking for them, and you might be surprised at what you might find.
Great. So here's another interesting question. Are our genes also responsible to increase the attention in us?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know enough about that. So I guess if most things can eventually get attributed to something genetic, because obviously your genetic material or your genome codes for all of the information that makes up every part of your physiology, I guess. So you could suggest that there are some genetic links to attention span, because the way your brain is, the physiology of your brain would obviously have an effect. But I don't know enough about that. So unfortunately, I can't give you a definitive answer, although I would think, as a scientist myself, I would think that there is a link.
Perfect. So I'll move on to the next one then. So there are two questions, so I have just combined them. What's your view on experiential learning, and how can we change the trend of learning from mark-based to experiential-based in our daily classroom?
Wow, that's such a great question. So for those who are unfamiliar with experience-based learning or experiential learning experiences, it sounds funny, doesn't it? But it really puts the student in, and again, this is exceptionally effective for kinesthetic learners. So experiential learning is really, I guess, a concept that arrived from the increased demand for vocational studies. So starting to equip students with very, very technical vocational skills instead of the traditional academic skills. So you see lots and lots of institutes that focus on technical education. So experiential learning really started there, because it's really, really effective when you're learning on the job, because vocational oftentimes suggests on-the-job kind of learning, because they can see it being applied in a real setting, okay? Now, obviously, moving away from mark-based to experiential learning is problematic slightly, because how do we assess experiential learning, right? It's actually very, very difficult to assess them, because it's not as easy as assigning marks based on competence. So your ability to perform certain tasks in an experiential way, how do you design a marking rubric around that? So it's not easy, but not impossible, okay? I guess in the context of the future and, subject matter that's pretty academic, mathematics, sciences, some of your humanities like geography, unfortunately, these aren't necessarily subjects that you can solely rely on experiential learning. There needs to be still quite a a significant proportion of time dedicated for those sort of core subjects in still a very academic way. We can be creative, because I have seen, certainly for biology practicals, where there's assessment around the ability of a student to perform certain biological tests, for example. So if one of the learning objectives is that a student is able to perform basic microscopy, then yes, then we can mark them against the final slide that they make and put under the microscope. Or say in a zoological sense, if I expect a zoologist to be able to identify an animal, then I need to be able to give them a mystery animal and they work out, what that is using what they've learned. So yes, those are forms of experiential learning that we can assess. But like I said, for high school especially, when it comes to like a way in which you need to quantify knowledge before they enter university, unfortunately at this stage, there still needs to be a substantial emphasis on mark-based learning, mark-based, I guess, teaching.
Thank you. So there's one final question, just so that we wind up the session on time. Can you give some points regarding how we can make our e-content more interesting for students?
Yes, great question. What is e-content? Oh, I wish I had showed you this. I like to think of myself as a little bit of a comedian. My kids, every time I get my evaluation from students back, one of the things they always ask is that, or they always comment is that Dr. G is really, really funny. This semester, I had the opportunity to make videos, those self-directed learning videos that you saw a while ago. And those of you that do, I'll just quickly type in the link to that right now. So it's a very simple link and everybody can see. And our friends on YouTube, the link is bit.ly, so bit.ly/Dr. G Temp, DRGTEMP. So I've just put that on the chat group in the WebEx platform. And that's a very, very simple link that you can access all the videos. Hopefully you found some humor in them. I think that one thing, and I know a lot of educators might disagree with me, but I do believe that every educator must be funny, because laughter really is the best medicine. And laughter is really the best way in which you learn. And so I like to think of myself as someone that actually uses humor and comedy quite effectively. In this particular semester, I actually did a practical class on community ecology completely from my kitchen bench. And I filmed it so that my students had an experience of what it might be like when they did the practical in the lab. And we did lots of funny things. And I even had reference to Salt Bae, which is, I guess, a guy that became famous for simply dusting salt on food. And I did that little jingle with my kids. I also referenced Martha Stewart because I turned it almost into like a cooking class. And, I made jokes like, and here's one I prepared earlier. So these are really, really ways that we can get our students to laugh a little bit and not take life so seriously. That's also how we become the most memorable educators. I think Priyanka at the start of, and I think it ties up nicely now, Priyanka at the start of today alluded to the fact that Austrade has that video competition. I remember 2 years ago, I can't remember the school now, but there was one school that actually won the UQ and they actually came and visited us. And I actually spoke to the two students. Yeah, I spoke to the two students and their teacher. I can't remember what school they're from. I absolutely can't remember, but they came, they spent a week with us in Queensland. And when I got a chance to talk to the students, I asked them, what do you love most about your teachers. And it's not about oh, they taught me well. It's not about the subject matter is interesting. They remember their teachers because of the funny moments they had in class. And they can directly associate that fun moments with learning. And so the best way to introduce the most effective learning is your own personality, which I think there is a time and place for all educators to work on. Thank you very much, India. This has been a wonderful evening, and I do hope that there was something you took away from my sharing today in some shape and form. I also hope that this is not the last time we meet. I hope we can see each other again, and in digital form, maybe in person when I next visit India. And I also look forward to welcoming your students that do join us as undergraduates later on in their life. Thank you very much to Austrade for organizing such a wonderful event. Back to you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Dr. G. In fact, there are a lot of educators who are asking us about those resources you mentioned. So while I wrap up the session, it would be good if you could just put a message on the chat about the resources or the link, how to access it. So again, I'm sure all the participants enjoyed the session. We would like to conclude this masterclass by thanking all the participants for their participation today and such great questions. A big thank you to Dr. G for his time and such wonderful presentation. I've learned a lot today. We will send you a recording of the masterclass in the next few days. Thank you and have a good day. Bye.
Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Goodbye.
Yeah, we thought of it.